And welcome to Carb Addict, now Carnivore. I'm Lana, and today I am delighted to welcome Dr. Joan Ifland to our broadcast. She's got so much information. It's going to be an awesome show today. Dr. Ifland teaches health practitioners how to use food addiction recovery to put diet-related diseases into remission. She's the lead editor and author of the textbook, Processed Food Addiction, selected by the Oprah Winfrey Network as food addiction specialist, fellow of the American College of Nutrition, and innovator in food addiction recovery programs. Welcome, Dr. Ifland.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, I'm just so happy to have you because your expertise is so needed. And the people who watch my YouTube channel are just hungry for information. We stumbled into this zero carb way of eating without really knowing what we were doing. All we know is we feel better.
Yes.
And yet so many of us struggle. And that's why I started the channel, because I saw among the discussions how much people were struggling. And I thought we need to get some solid information here. So thank you so much for coming today to help us out with some good information.
Thank you for creating the channel for the information. I can do all this research and come to all these helpful conclusions, but if I don't have anybody to get it out, it doesn't do any good. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Yes, you are so right. I'm an author, and if you don't have anybody reading your material, what good is it? Yeah. Excellent. So the standard American diet, which we like to call the SAD diet, has so many highly processed, low nutrient, cheap stuff in it. And you call them food-like substances, which I love that description. So can you explain that food-like substances and addictive and all that about the food industry and about the 1980s in particular?
Oh my gosh. Well, let's start with what happened in the 1980s. There were two just earth-shattering events in the 1980s, and they are related and connected. The first one was the high fructose corn syrup came onto the market. And an incredible researcher, pediatric endocrinologist, Rob Lustig, who wrote the book Metabolical, he's published an academic article showing that high fructose corn syrup moves through the body like corn alcohol. So that is not something that should be mixed in our food, particularly in the quantities in which it's mixed into our foods. Without at least, if it's acting on the body like an alcohol, it needs to be regulated and put into the category with other alcohols, and just we should be protected from it. And instead, it's being pushed on us. So that was one huge event, and it precipitated a second huge event, which is R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, the tobacco companies, bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods in 3 short years, 1985 to 1988. So you just got to sit back and ask yourself, why would executives who make their money from creating intense cravings for worthless, destructive products, and that's the cigarette industry, create intense cravings for worthless, destructive products? Why would they be interested in processed foods? And you can just see in that moment, you get that click. It's more like an explosion. You see exactly what happened to us. So there is now way in my background, I've got an MBA from Stanford, 1978. I just went to my 45th reunion. But why is that so important to this discussion? It's because I'm trained in business models. I know how to look at an industry and figure out what is the business model And there is an addiction, or you could call it intense craving. You could call it a craving business model. And the way it works is that you take an absolutely worthless product that can create intense cravings, and you build a big fantasy world around it. You make it very cheap. You make it very available. You ascribe qualities to it that are not there, and you make it very addictive. So how this worked with tobacco was it started out with the invention of the cigarette rolling machine. And why was that so important? It's because then the cost of cigarettes went way, way down. Before there were cigarette rolling machines, people hand rolled. There were cigarette factories. There were rows of people hand rolling cigarettes and putting them into boxes. So with cigarette rolling machines, you get the price down, which means that you could market it to a much greater population. So that is, I'm going to give you the 5 A's of the addiction business model. This is a business model. And the first one is affordability. So the person has to be able to buy the product often enough. It has to be cheap enough that the person can buy it often enough, because that's how you develop those intense, overwhelming cravings that are characteristic of addiction. Is you use a substance that pops craving neurotransmitters in the brain from the reward. It's called the reward system or the pleasure system, but it's where addictions come from. So the product has to be cheap enough that you can use it often enough that the reward centers become dependent on that substance to create pleasure. So that the cells, they can't do it on their own anymore. They wait for the stimulation and then they release the pleasure neurotransmitters. So it's got to be cheap enough. It's got to be affordable. And the second A is available. So the person's got to be able to get their hand on it really easily, particularly at the moment of a craving, in order to keep from going through withdrawal. Once you've gone through withdrawal and the cravings stop, and then that business, that corporation has lost a customer. So they want to make sure you can get it really quick, get it really easily. They put it everywhere. And when cigarettes were at their height, there were cigarette vending machines everywhere. You could get cigarettes everywhere. You could smoke them everywhere. When I got out of business school in 1978 and went to work in a corporation, people smoked in their offices. If you didn't smoke, you still had an ashtray in your office in case somebody wanted to smoke a cigarette in your office. People smoked in meetings. It's just incredible when you think about it in retrospect. Okay, so availability is a big issue. Advertising. The product is worthless. It's repulsive. It's disgusting. It's disease carrying. And so if you're going to sell it, you've got to cover all that up. And instead, cigarettes are sexy. But you see Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart flirting and smoking. Cigarettes are sexy. And then they persuaded suffragettes that if they really wanted to compete with men, they would have to smoke. And smoking became rebellious. And then it became sophisticated. And you had Audrey Hepburn with her cigarette holder. And you have, still you have the Virginia Slims. You've come a long way, baby. Just repulsive. So you have to attach messages to these disgusting, repulsive products and create delusion. So they did that with tobacco. And you have to hide addictive substances in the product to make it really addictive. So with tobacco, they isolated nicotine and added it back to cigarettes. That's addictive product formulation. So that's your fourth A. Your fifth A is just, I don't know, I mean, it's so depraved, is you attack children. So it's the young age A. It's the fifth A, the young age of onset. Because the younger somebody starts this intense cravings, the less able they will be to stop. Because how do you stop? How do you stop the cravings? Let's just jump ahead a little bit. You stop using the product and you move away from reminders. So the sad thing is that at some point, the cravings will be released at the exposure to a reminder. You don't have to actually be using the product. In fact, the cravings are most intense while you're seeking the product. The addiction, the cravings wants you to seek the product. So it makes the cravings most intense when you're thinking about going and getting it. So that is very hard to extinguish if those brain cells have very little experience stimulating themselves. So if they have very little experience being stimulated without the presence of the substance, then that person is going to suffer more during withdrawal. They don't have the pleasure of dopamine or serotonin or opioids or cannabinoids, because those cells are just like, oh, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. I mean, maybe a long time ago, we knew how to release pleasure neurotransmitters without the stimulation of the substance, but oh my gosh, that was such a long time ago, really. So the period of, depression, anxiety, irritability following, abstinence. So you say like, all right, I'm getting off this. And there's a period of withdrawal before those brain cells can start pumping out pleasure on their own. So if you start really young, the amount of experience those brain cells have with creating pleasure without the presence of a substance is much shorter. So with cigarettes, they went after 10-year-olds. You might remember the Joe Camel, the cool cartoon. And that was aimed at 10-year-old boys. And what happened? Well, Congress stepped in and they stopped that campaign. They could see it with their own eyes. That was not okay. But all of that regulation has evaporated for processed foods. Now, this is chilling, but we're going to go through it. Here's the evidence. I'm a PhD. I'm a researcher, which means I don't go anywhere without evidence. Where is the evidence coming from for what I'm about to say? When the courts were extracting settlements from the tobacco industry, one of the requirements of the settlements was that they would put tens of thousands of internal documents on file. Happened to be at University of California, San Francisco, which has an amazing team of researchers there. Now it's millions of documents because other court settlement orders have documents filed at UCSF. Okay. So those incredible researchers there have gone through the internal tobacco documents, and they have put together the story, which I'm about to tell you, which is, now this is explicit. This is explicitly described in these internal tobacco documents. They took the Marlboro Country Store, which is a cravings building business model. So first, you give away some free cigarettes, enough to start the dependence. Like, okay, we can't really put out pleasure until we have the substance. So that's the dependence. 3 cigarettes is enough to start that dependence. So now the person is buying their own cigarettes because they don't want to go through withdrawal. They don't know that's why they're doing it, because this is all very hidden. And then they notice that there's a coupon on the cigarette package. So they start collecting coupons and buying more and more cigarettes to get the coupons. Well, what do they do with the coupons? They send them into the Marlboro Country Store and they receive triggers. It's a belt buckle. It's a cigarette lighter. It's a jacket. It's a shirt. It's a hat. And what those signals, now we're wearing the signals. Now we're wearing the triggers. So now the person is being constantly, these poor, hyper-activated, excited pleasure centers now are pumping out cravings at the site of the reminders. They're called cues, signals, stimulation. Okay, explicitly, this is diabolical, of course, explicitly described in these internal documents is the transference of the Marlboro Country Store to Kool-Aid for children. The Kool-Aid wacky warehouse. I mean, just the nerve, the absolute just depravity of naming this marketing technique by the name of a mental illness, wacky, is just stunning. It's just stunning. And so now you have children who are, maybe they have Kool-Aid at a friend's house. Sugar is more, in some research, sugar has been shown to be more addictive than cocaine or heroin. How do you measure addictiveness? Well, in one study, the animals, the laboratory animals were exposed repeatedly to heroin, cocaine, sugar, and saccharin. And they developed the brain structure of an addiction. So then they put the rats in a cage with all 4 choices, and they chose the sugar. They could have chosen cocaine, they could have chosen heroin, they chose sugar. And the researchers thought, well, maybe it's because it has calories. So they took the sugar away, the rats chose saccharin. That is how addictive sugar is. Plus, it's one of the other measures of relative addictiveness of substances is how quickly a pleasure center releases that flood of cravings upon contact. So the fastest is sugar. Sugar touches a taste bud within half a second, dopamine is releasing. You know, everything else takes a minute or 10 minutes or 20 minutes before the brain reacts. With sugar, it's half a second. So they put out Kool-Aid with coupons, and you could send in, if you were a kid, you could send in and you could get Kool-Aid. What's the name of the character? Cool dude or something, cool man. And you could get shorts, and you could get a wristwatch, you could get a shirt, you could get a hat, you could get a cassette player, you could get games. And so now that poor child is surrounded with by triggers that release cravings for sugar in that child's brain. So that child's brain is supposed to be learning and gaining life skills and becoming knowledgeable and secure in the world. And instead, it's craving. So that child, it doesn't get a childhood, because the cravings are also activating stress pathways, and everything's active now in the midbrain. It's pulling the blood supply away from the frontal lobe. What's in the frontal lobe? Well, as you listen to me list off what's in the frontal lobe, think about epidemics. So attention, we have an epidemic of attention deficit. Learning, we have epidemics of learning difficulties. Memory, we have epidemics of memory loss. Decision making and problem solving. epidemics of poor decision-making and poor problem solving, and then impulse control. And so we have people are just devastated because they cannot control the impulse for these substances. So that's what happened in the 1980s. You see everything that diabetes and obesity and heart disease, depression, dementia, Alzheimer's, all just start ratcheting up from the mid 1980s.
Well, I remember the Kool-Aid commercials and the Kool-Aid pictures with the face on it. And that was when I was maybe 10 years old when that was going on. Yeah.
They weren't allowed to market cigarettes to you, but they could market sugar to you.
Yes. Yes. So how can someone tell if they have an addiction, a sugar addiction?
Well, unfortunately for this, so one of the things I hope everybody who's listening will grab onto is it's a severe addiction and it's complex. And this is why it will kill 1.6 million Americans this year from cancer, from diabetes, from obesity, from heart disease, from stroke, from Alzheimer's. And processed foods, I mean, all right, so let's just leave it there. So why will 1.6 million Americans be unable to change what they eat? It's because the addiction is severe. The cravings are dominant. The cravings are dominating every other part of the brain except one, and that's our big ray of hope here. And it's complex. So let's take this in two parts, if you want to. One, let's go through the 11 signs of addiction to alcohol, and we will reword them for processed foods. And I think people will be astonished that all of these weight loss programs and the eating disorder programs and the therapy programs all missed this massive bit of information, which is, hello, the brain is generating these intense cravings that dominate all other thinking. So let's just run through those. There are 11 of them. And if you are experiencing 6 or more, and if this were a diagnosis, which it's not, we're just going to give you the signs, then you would be considered to have a severe addiction. Okay, so let's just do this part, and then we'll talk about what that means. So unintended use. Number 1, unintended use. You're going to eat one, but you eat the box. You wake up, I'm going to be good today. By 10 o'clock, you're in the front of the vending machine. I'm going on a diet. 2 days later, you're binging. That's unintended use. Failure to cut back. Over 90% of people who lose weight have started to regain it within 3 years. So prevalence, let's talk about prevalence, because I want people to know that this is the evidence that I use to say, wow, the evidence shows that over 80% of Americans have a severe addiction. Thank you so much, tobacco/processed food industry. You did a great job. You got 2/3 of Americans to smoke, American adults to smoke. And now 2/3 of the country, 83% of the country is overweight or obese. 80%. So that's 80% unintended use. Nobody intended to become overweight or obese. Number 2, failure to cut back. You can use that number again, but you can also go to the other research showing that over 90% of people will start to regain weight loss within 3 years. Cravings. Cravings are correlated with body mass index. The higher the body mass index, the higher the cravings. Let's just do the 6 that are most common, and then we'll swing back around and do the other 5. Use in spite of knowledge of consequences. So I think mid-80s, maybe 84, 85% of the country has one of the following, one or more of the following. Metabolic anomalies is what they're called. High triglycerides, high cholesterol, high glucose, high blood pressure, or high waist to hip ratio. Every time they take a bite, they're eating in spite of knowledge of consequences. And then there's tolerance. So you're eating more and more over time. And you see this over the whole population. We're today, well, let's see, 2018, we're eating 73% of our food in processed foods. And that you can see that increasing over time from the mid-1980s. So in the mid-1980s, maybe we were eating half. And now over those 30 some years, it's increased to 73%. So that's the whole population. That's on average across everybody. And then the last one is use for reasons other than hunger. So because you're sad, or you're angry, or you're tired, or you feel sick, or you have a headache, or you need some energy. But those are drug uses. You're doing that. You're drawn to use the processed foods to avoid withdrawal. Those are withdrawal symptoms. So over 80% of Americans have 6 of those 11 criteria. And that's the threshold for severe addiction. Now, let's just quickly go over the other 5. Time spent. It's not just the time going from fast food place to fast food place, or getting up in the middle of the evening and going and getting something, or going back and forth to the vending machine in the break room. It's not just that. It's also head time. It's thought time. One of the first things people love about getting off these substances is the release from the obsession, the compulsive thinking about them. And then you have relationship problems. You have failure to fulfill roles. You have social activities given up. And you have hazardous use, like eating and driving with your elbow, things like that. Yeah.
Wow. So as you were going through that, I was counting off on my fingers and absolutely have all 6 of the first ones. Yeah. So what do you do about it? What if you know that
so one thing I would say just right off the bat is go to foodaddictionreset.com, and take the self-quiz. It's not a diagnosis, but there are the 11 criteria. Take the self-quiz, leave us a comment, leave us your email address, and we will invite you to a free information session about our programs. I spent the last 28 years, so I got off of sugar and flour in 1996, and got all these just shocking benefits from doing so. And I made a commitment to tell the world. And so I've been at this for 28 years now. We know what to do, and it's not what anybody else is doing. We just filed a big old patent for what we're doing. It's brand new. We've had online recovery communities. We're calling them empowerment communities for 6 years now, and they work really well.
Wow.
Okay, why? Why would an online community work really well? Well, because it's a deeply seated addiction. Here are the complicating factors. 1, it starts at a very young age. There's evidence when that fetus develops the first smell cell, the first cell that can smell. What does it do? It goes over and it starts sampling the amniotic fluid in the mother, so that when that baby is born, it has a preference for what the mother's eating. because what the mother's eating is going to come through the breast milk, and you want that baby to like that breast milk. So if the mother's eating processed foods, that baby is born with a preference for processed foods. We know that sugar does come through breast milk. And so that being, that human, has never not known being numbed out by processed foods. So that's a complicating factor that makes it harder to break. The younger the person is when they start using a substance, the harder it is to give it up. This is also what's called polysubstance. It's a lot of different substances. So sugar activates dopamine. Flour activates serotonin. Gluten activates the opioid, morphine pathway in the brain.
Wow.
Dairy has 4 different kinds of natural casomorphines because it's designed to put a 100-pound baby calf to sleep. That's how strong that narcotic is. It's natural. It's manufactured by the cow. It has a very specific purpose, which is to put that 100-pound baby calf to sleep so it will absorb nutrients after feeding. And then excessive salt has also been shown to activate the opioid pathway. And then excessive fats. And this is really the message for the carnivore community, which is if you don't treat the cravings, they will transfer to fat. And this is stunning research done out of the University of Boston, Pedro Caton's laboratory, where they showed the progression of addiction in rats that were given access to fat. And there were some aspects of it that were more addictive than the rats given access to sugar. So you got to be very careful on a carnivore diet that you're not transferring sugar addiction to fat addiction, because the sugar addiction doesn't actually go away, it incubates, it goes underground. And because you have this industry that's constantly provoking those brain cells that are trained to crave sugar, it can reemerge. And then you have a combination of sugar and fat addiction, which is deadly. It really cripples cell function. Okay, so you have all that, and then you have this predatory industry, which is constantly bombarding us with craving triggers, constantly dominating our brain with cravings. And then you have the medical industry, which is profiting from the diseases. So once you know that processed foods cripple cell function, then you know, and we've seen this in the 6 years we've had our online communities, almost everything gets better because cells start to function again. So whether it's a mental illness because your brain cells are not functioning properly, or heart disease, or liver disease, or kidney disease, or gut disease, or skin disease, or reproductive problems, they all get better because the cells start working again. So it's really fun. This is fun. I mean, yeah, you're going to have a headache for 4 days or maybe 8 days when you're originally getting off of it, but then it's just fun. And I know a lot of you on carnivore diets have experienced that release from the obsession. Mm-hmm. So just to finish that thought, the excessive fat activates the same pathway as cannabis. It's a cannabinoid pathway. Mm. Okay, so this, once you know all of that, once you know it's a severe addiction, once you know it's really complex from all these other social factors, then you just breathe a huge sigh of relief. Because then you know why all of these weight loss programs and eating disorder programs and behavioral therapy programs could never, ever possibly have worked. You know, there are different estimates as to how many billions of brain cells we have. And what we are up against is rewiring every one. You know, if that first smell cell went over and started sampling amniotic fluid that had processed foods in it, You just know every cell in the brain has got to be rewired. And you're not going to do that in a 6-week program or a 1-week program or even a 1-year program. Once the brain has been rewired, then it's got to be maintained. So if you rewire a brain and then that person just goes right back out into mainstream culture and they're getting thousands of messages, reminders, stimulators, cues, prompts, the old cravings will wake up. It's just like riding a bicycle. Once you know how to ride a bicycle, yep, 40 years later, you might wobble a little bit, but you still know how to ride a bicycle. That's permanently imprinted on your brain cells. And the craving reactions are permanently printed on your brain cells. So if you get enough bombardment, the cravings will erupt again. So if you are on carnivore, but you're struggling, you still have cravings for processed foods and you can't stick to your carnivore, or you've noticed that your fat consumption is going up. You used to have 1 bag of pork rinds and now you're having 3 bags, or you used to have 1 serving of pepperoni and now you're having 10. You've developed an addiction to fat. And I'm so sorry. Let's say this a different way. The sugar, flour, addiction has transferred to fat, especially if you're following somebody who says you can eat all the fat you want. That is deadly. It's not true. Also, you guys need to really watch transference to dairy addiction because of the case of morphines in dairy. Okay, so what do you do? Rewire hundreds of billions of brain cells? Wow. What do you do? Well, we know what to do. We know. I in the 28 years before, well, 22 years before I started the online communities, I tried 14 major things to try to get people off of processed foods. But it wasn't until I got assigned to write the textbook between 2014 and 2017 that I realized why nothing worked, why nothing I had done worked, and why nothing out there was working. It's because when you have a deeply seated craving disorder, you do immersion empowerment, what we call immersion empowerment. And if it were drugs or alcohol, you'd go to a residential facility for 2 years. 1 year residential and then 1 year work release. And we're not sending hundreds of millions of, I mean, that's just 80% of the country. What is that? That's going to be like over 200 million people. No, I don't think we're doing residential treatment for 200 million people. I don't think that's going to work. But here's the cool thing with Zoom. You can do residential, the equivalent of, well, it's really intensive outpatient programs. You can do the equivalent and still carry on your day, still carry on your life. You don't have to leave your home. You don't have to leave your family, your children, your jobs, your volunteers, your faith organizations. You don't have to go anywhere. And that's the gift of Zoom. Because what we figured out, and now remember when I said that the cravings are the dominant force in the brain, except for one, and that's our saving grace. So that one is the survival, the ultimate survival instinct, which is to belong, fit in, be accepted, be cherished, because all that led to be protected. So look at humans. We don't have fangs, we don't have horns, we don't have big claws. We are incredibly vulnerable to the saber-toothed tiger if you're an evolutionist, or to the neighboring tribe if you're a creationist. And but what we can do, if we can band together, 7 or 12 of us, we can fight off almost any predator. So if you're alive today and you're an evolutionist, you are here because all of your predecessors, and the scientists think that evolution's been going on for 7 million years, so you've got a lot of predecessors, that you survived because you had the ability to fit in. You had that desire to belong. And so you were always pretty close to your other humans. And if anything happened, you could, boom, come together in that group, throw rocks, scream, yell, put your hands up, and fight off a predator. If you were by yourself, if you were too far away from your other people, then you would die. A saber-toothed tiger would get you, and you would die. So this is the spoiler. You know, if you have a tag team, whichever team your belonging instinct is on is going to win. So the food industry is very good about getting your desire to belong. It's called mirror neurons. They literally mirror other people's behavior down into your own brain. They're very good at capturing that. You know, they have groups of people singing about these horrible products, and you just want to belong to those really handsome, gorgeous people. Yeah, you want to fit in there, so you use their products. It's cigarettes. Cigarettes are sexy, and processed foods are delicious and fun. It's the same technique for delusion and ultimately disease creation. So what our programs do is they capture that urge to belong. The people on our screens are practicing thought control and behavior control and sleep and movement and food production and positive thinking and processing negative feelings. And they're practicing just having a great day, relationship management especially. And when you take away all those stresses are a huge cravings trigger, and you give people tons of skills. We teach 152 skills. How do you protect yourself? Not just against the food industry, but the pharmaceutical industry and the fashion industry and the entertainment industry and the screen industry, gambling industry, pornography. How do you protect yourself and your family against all of those people who know how to create these intense cravings? You give your mirror neurons some other group to latch on to. It's that simple. So how did we pull this off? We have 3 communities, and we're just launching a 4th. The first community is basic training. It's called the ARC. And you learn those 152 skills in there. Most importantly, we broadcast live with trained hosts 15 to 17 hours a day. So how do your mirror neurons decide who to copy? I'm going to belong, I'm going to belong, I'm going to belong. Who should I belong to? It's the people they see the most. So that's why we're on 15 to 17 hours a day. It's very easy to see these people who are practicing all of these skills and escaping from the prison of food obsession and escaping from transferring the addiction to something else. It's so easy to make those people the people you see the most. You just open your laptop, your smartphone, your computer, and there we are. When we started advertising this six years ago, people signed up from all over the world. And then a couple of years ago, that's community number 1 is basic training, the ARC. Community number 2 is the food addiction recovery advocate training. So we started, then a couple of years ago, we started training advocates. So this is a very structured 12 assignments over 6 months where you get very specific skills to help the next person. And how are you learning to do it? Because you're learning to help yourself. So it's a dual track program where you're learning in the ARC how to help yourself, and you're organizing that material into a body of knowledge where you can help the next person. So then the third community is our remission community. It's new this year. What we noticed over those 6 years is a lot of diseases were going into remission that the pharmaceutical industry is telling us are incurable. Well, they're not incurable at all, but it just happens that pharmaceuticals don't cure them. Community and meditation and visualization and qigong and tapping and breath work and sound healing, all those things actually work. And the pharmaceutical companies 100 years ago, they persuaded the regulators that if it wasn't pharmaceuticals, it didn't work. And that was a big lie. So we're seeing if you can get cells to work again because you're doing all these regulatory things, breath work regulates cell function, and clean food fuels cells appropriately, and they don't fill up with waste and trash. If you can get those cells to function, I say, unless it's been surgically removed, you lost it in an accident, or you're born without it, it'll start to work again if you do this immersion remission. It's called the remission community, remission optimistic community, or the ROC. It's just, I mean, it's so obvious. Once you go through it and you see it, it's so friggin' obvious that of course this works. I cannot make a claim, I'll just be hauled right off to jail if I make a claim. But if you have been told that your disease is incurable, it's only because it's not curable by a pharmaceutical. Pharmaceuticals are great for infections. They're great for accidents. They're great for surgical things. But there's this incredible book called Healthy No Matter What. It's written by a World Health Organization doctor and a philosopher. And they say in there that if you go to a Western medicine doctor or Western medicine provider, you will not hear about 90% of healing opportunities. They have 10%, and the other 90% is still out there. And so that's what we've organized. It's a 4-month program. And so that's what you have to do. I know I just got slammed by a bariatric surgeon because I was giving lectures to a group of mostly providers, and this bariatric surgeon could see that they were getting interested, and they were starting to refer people to our programs, and he made sure I was never invited back again. So just know. I just gave a presentation last night on diabetes remission, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which I know is a plant-based group. It's not a group for this community. But they're like, look, here's all the evidence that lifestyle puts diabetes into remission. Diet, just clearing out the processed foods and refined foods out of a food plan can do it. But most people need a program with a lot of opportunity to connect to other people. Yeah, that's mirror neuron engagement. That's making sure that your mirror neurons are copying people, imitating, mimicking, fitting in, satisfying that urge to belong with people who are healthy. And it's not your fault. And it's obvious it's not your fault. And it's not because you don't have enough willpower. It's not any of those things. Childhood trauma plays a role in the formation of this because the processed foods are terribly emotionally destabilizing. So now children are being brought up in households where the adults are emotionally unstable. There's all this processed food sitting around, and the kid, of course, can develop these intense cravings. So yeah, go to, let me just line it out again, if you don't mind. Food addiction reset, take the self quiz. if you are a professional and you know this is a missing link, we get a lot of health professionals who just say, yeah, I hear it. I tell my patients what to do. They can't do it. There's a missing link. It's the cravings. It's the addiction. So if you're in that boat, or if you want to be equipped to help another person, then please visit Food Addiction Recovery Advocate.com. And we will train you. We will equip you to help another person. And then if you have a disease that you've been told is incurable or chronic, or you'll have to take medication on it for the rest of your life, or you'll be in pain for the rest of your life, please go to remissionoptimistic.com.
I will put those links in the description box, and I have them all in my email box. So wow, this has been just so amazing. We've been almost an hour already, and I just have so much more that I want to know. But I cannot even express to you how grateful I am for you to come and spend your time with us. And it also reiterates the importance of community, the importance that we support each other and love each other and help each other through this massive problem.
I want to back up what you just said with a study. The researcher's name is Bahr, B-A-H-R. And in the study, he said, if your social circle is not losing weight, you cannot lose weight. That's how powerful the need to belong, the need to fit in is. On the other hand, if you do something like you stop eating processed foods, you can raise the level of awareness. You can create a new normal, a higher level of health for your social circle. But you got to have you got to have your backup tribe here keeping you normal. But you can help other people just by being an example yourself.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, there is hope. There is hope. And in the community that I've been in now for almost 10 months, I've seen all of these chronic conditions reversing and people telling their stories of no more pain and so forth. And I've experienced tremendous amount of help and recovery in my own body as a result of that. So you are giving us the missing element.
It is community.
Yes. Thank you so much. Well, I would love to talk to you again sometime down the road.
Call me anytime.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ifland, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.